Conscious Curiosity, a collection of recorded conversations in which childlike wonder meets the deep mysteries of life. Hosted by Indigo Bruno and the Star Child.
I feel like there's a lot you have to learn on your own. And you don't know from the beginning that you're going to be getting into all this stuff because it like keeps expanding. Like before, I'm sure, like when you'd send me your one of your first videos, which is awesome, by the way. I think we should all revisit our old content and like react to it, which would be very fun to do and pretty funny.
Yeah, let us
But
know if you
it's like-
want that, because like because we just talked about this, because man, it would be so cringy, but also interesting to see how the journey
Yeah.
has gone. You know.
And it's weird how it's like cringy for you, but for me, it's like it's just like so funny and such a creative video. But for you, I don't know, it might be like you can't even watch it.
It's tough, bro. It's a 3-part series too, and there's some other ones that I watched after I sent you, like, or when I sent you that one. There's one where I don't even know the purpose of that, but it was just me in a classroom asking, like, do you want the blue pen or the red pen? But like real cheap Matrix style. So I think going back and revisiting and reacting to it would be dope, man. Also, your old videos, like.
Yeah, I mean,
Excited
but
for
dude,
that.
yours I feel like was like some high quality editing and like some intro stuff. That was pretty sick. How'd you even like know how to do that back then?
When I studied it, like, I have
Oh,
a
right, yeah.
Yeah, I have a bachelor's in creative business. My friends just joked around that I'm making a degree in social media, and looking back, they're right. I can't
Yeah.
even lie. So I don't know, we played around with a green screen. We had a studio, and we had some editing assignments as well. So I just picked up from that. But the video, like, it's funny you say
That's
it's
sick.
high quality, because the green screen is ass. I didn't have any good lighting for this whatsoever, and instead of one of those fancy green screens that's expensive that you have like this pop-up, I just had some green cloth. It was if you saw the setup, bro, even the old studio I had, the first studio I had, bro, this was crazy, man.
It looked like it was made on like a TikTok green screen. Low key, it looked fine to me. I don't know.
I mean, I take that. I remember I wasn't too happy with it, but it was just the best that I could do. Just the studio I had, man. I had a whole room where I kind of first set up, and when I started streaming and everything, and it was in this old Dutch house, and I remember just the attic wasn't built out. There wasn't even just any isolation. It was just these wooden beams, and just on the wooden beams, just the roof tiles. I even
Holy
had
shit.
and that was a funny story. My landlord at the time, there was a big storm, and it had these plastic windows on the side, and the storm just broke one of the windows. So then it just started raining into the studio, right? It's like the window was broke, and it was like
You had some extra ambience when you recorded the video for that.
exactly,
That's
man.
fucked.
And I called the landlord, and I'm telling him, hey, there's a hole in the roof. Can we kind of fix that window? That would be amazing. So then this dude on a bicycle appears. He has no gear, right? He just has a bicycle. Knocks, like, I'm here to repair the window. And I look at him like, okay, well, you don't have any, like, he didn't have any tools. He didn't have anything. So I'm like, okay.
What if he turned his bicycle into the tools he's gonna use? Imagine.
Dutch dudes, maybe. I mean, anything is possible with them. But he just goes up. I just show him where it is, and he's like, yeah, I'll be down. 2 minutes later, he comes down. And he's like, yeah, it's fixed. And I'm just looking at him like, what do you mean it's fixed? So I go up there, and the only thing he did, he took some other roof tiles that was somewhere else on the roof, and just tiled over the hole in the window. There was no window anymore. There was just like the roof tiles. It was mad.
What an innovative man. That's also crazy. I'd want to know more about like your experience with like content and doing social media stuff when you were studying that in college, because that's so cool that you have that as like I guess a degree or a bachelor's certificate. I feel like that's so awesome that you have that. And you know, like never really talk about it, but I feel like it's it's something that could definitely be helpful if you, I'm sure like for your job, maybe you presented stuff like that, or I don't know, for stuff like that, I feel like it'd be helpful. And it's just cool. Like I wanted to learn more about what you have to do. Did you like learn hook strategies or like editing stuff? What would they make you, or
Man,
your homework assignments and shit?
bro, you honestly, it was a really weird study because we were kind of like, I guess the rabbits that they just test chemicals on. That's really what
Oh
it
no.
felt like, because we were the second group of people that were ever going to study this course, so nothing was really
That's weird.
predetermined.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
teachers made it up as we went. We had this
Oh
thing
shit.
called personal professional development, PPD. Man, that shit was hilarious, and it changed its entire structure every single year. So one day, like one year, we had to create like a presentation where we said, okay, this is what we did besides our study, in kind of the media field. So, for example, I got university credits for dressing up as a wizard and reading tarot cards. I got
No,
university credits
dude,
for
no
that.
way. It started because of school.
Yeah, yeah.
That's crazy. That's sick, man. What university were you going to, man? I gotta get some referral codes for my audience and get people to sign up for that.
Bro, for sure. I mean, if anyone is interested, I'm happy to share it. NHL Stenden University, Applied Sciences. That's NHL Stenden
That's so
Hockey
sick.
School. It's a school, I think it's all over the Netherlands. They even have some branches in Bali and South Africa where you can even do an Erasmus, like an exchange year to one of the other schools.
Mm.
Which is how I ended up in Portugal as well, because I did an exchange here where I did analog photography, which is a whole other random side quest, but
Well,
that's my minor. Yeah, and you could just do whatever. I remember one of the funny things in with that exchange program when the pandemic happened, right? There was an exchange program in South Africa. There was a safari guide. So it sounded really cool. You travel to South Africa and you go on safaris. You see
oh
lions
yeah,
and
so
you
sick.
like hippos and you film them, and that's your minor, right? You just have a degree in safari guiding or whatever.
Just
And
by doing that,
yeah, for half a year,
that
like a minor.
that's crazy. That so like, what is it? It takes like a week or two or something.
No, half a year. Half a
Oh,
year.
half a year. Okay. I
Yeah.
was
So
about to say, if you just go on like a safari trip, a quick little 30-second trip seeing lions, and then you have a minor in like zoology or something, that'd be crazy.
that would be crazy. No, I think it was something with a safari guide. What made it funny though, and especially in regards to what you said, because the pandemic happened, the
Yeah.
exchange didn't happen, and so they did it remote.
Uh,
So they just watched documentaries on lions
oh,
and shit, and still got the minor, which is
oh,
just, man.
that's still pretty cool that you can do that though.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool university experience. I feel like I don't talk about it as much because it was also pretty random at times, and I feel like I did learn a lot. However, I'm more grateful for the space that the university provided me with, all the people
Mm.
that I met and just the creative atmosphere that was all around. I mean, there's so many, and even on my YouTube and my TikTok, you can find some really weird clips of me and some fellow students just pulling up some weird stunts. I remember, oh man, and that was really funny. I had a follower special on Twitch or something, and I wanted to have some great surprise, right? So I came up with this concept that I get abducted midstream and people come like tear me out and shave my head in kind of like a ritualistic sense. And and then I pre-recorded that, but I added it into the live stream, and then I revealed that
Oh
it
shit,
happened, and I had the thing going on. That was
that's so
pretty
sick.
cool.
Is that available anywhere, like for people to watch, or it was like recorded?
Man, I mean, now that you say it, we
Because
did
that sounds
mention.
like some like college initiation like ritual to getting into like some not sorority, frat house or something.
Yeah, that's true.
That
I
sounds,
think.
but yeah, that's dope. And I was also wondering, like, Did you get when you were? I remember you told me you were trying different content ideas to see what would blow up. Were you doing that while you were still studying and like using the tools from your school to do that? Like trying to see what I guess would be viral or work.
I would say, um, I was still studying. I mean, I finished university only last year. So I was studying for the majority of the time that I was making videos. When I was really on the peak, I was studying. Even my documentary on the Azores, where I lost all the footage for the initial one, that was my bachelor thesis. by the way, which also really random, and that's
Yeah,
amazing. But I
I
remember.
remember you about that. Yeah, you had some like bunch of videos though. But what did you lose the footage of? Like the I guess long form footage. That's like
Man, it pains me in my heart to think
yeah,
about.
I can feel it through the fucking camera, dude. I'm sorry about that. Do you feel like it was for a lesson at least?
Yeah, always back up your footage. Have a second hard drive.
Yep. Yep.
that's that's
Number
the
one.
big one. That's the big one.
Yeah.
And secondly, I think I wouldn't have filmed the more proper series. Where
Mm,
now with the film crew from Germany, I went back to the Azores this spring. I don't think I would have done that if I would have gotten the footage and would have brought out the documentary.
yeah.
Because yeah, I mean, maybe, who knows. It certainly was good for some reason, and I'm still trying to get it back, but it probably costs a few €1,000 to restore all the footage, because it's just, I don't know, some distorted on some hard drive. But it was tough. It was 3 months worth of work. Just, I'm talking interviews with university professors, interviews with local journalists, with like just scientists
Holy
overall, with
shit.
spiritual people, just all of the excursions that I did to all of the various sites in the Azores. It was pretty rough, but now when I was back on the island, I was at least able to tell the team, okay, this is where I went. We need to go here. We don't need to necessarily go there. So we're able to kind of pick and choose and get the better shots out of it. But still kind of sucks to have lost
Yeah.
so much of work.
And what came out with the thesis? What would you tell them? Oh, because that's like a dog ate my homework kind of like for them, kind of, like,
Oh, for
oh yeah, my footage just got corrupted, and then they're like, oh, you sure about that?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, I mean, this was my bachelor thesis, was a string of events that was, it was honestly unbelievable. And I think at that point, my teacher was also just like, okay, sure, do something else unless you until you hand something in, right? Because
yeah,
so for the bachelor thesis, which I thought was really, really cool, you had two options. Either you do an internship at some company for a year, and that internship is in the media sector, of course, and then you just do a regular internship, but you just need to reflect, and that's your bachelor thesis. You didn't necessarily need to write something very profound or something like that, just like a thesis on what you've done.
yeah. No,
Or
like independent research stuff.
exactly, or you do an internship in your own company. So you
Mm,
say, okay, I'm using this year to start up my own media business. And that's what I chose. The problem was you were only allowed to do that when you were in the Netherlands. I wanted to stay in Portugal. And I was way over the deadline when I told my teacher, hey, I really want to do this, but I want to do this in Portugal. And he told
mm,
me, yeah, that's not going to happen. And so I talked to him. I talked to him like, okay, how can we make this happen? And he just said, okay, if you somehow find a creative community that takes you in, and where you also have a mentor that provides you with the guidance in order for you to really pursue this, and I have a meeting with that counselor and I deem it okay, then it's possible. And I was, you have until tomorrow, I was
oh,
just like,
fuck.
and I'm in Lisbon, and I'm just like, okay, how do I make this happen? And then there was this, I asked at my uni, like the exchange uni that I went to, no chance. Asked some other people, no chance. And then there's this one building that was always across my path to school, that just said creative space. It had like a big lettering, like
No
this
way.
creative space. And I just walked. It was the 21st of December, so right before Christmas holidays. Like barely anyone was at office, and I go into the reception of that place and I tell them my problem. I'm like, okay, look, this is really weird, but I need a mentor and a creative community to take me in so I can do my internship and convince my teacher. And this Portuguese lady is like, I don't know, talk to Ines, you know? And I'm like, okay. I sent her an email. She replies in 10 minutes and just says, yeah, I'll do it. And I'm like, wait, hold on. I tell my teacher can't believe it. You know, my teacher was like, no way it's gonna happen. And so Ines, and I love her. I'm so grateful for her. She just convinced my teacher. We didn't even meet. We just had an email, right? We had a meeting with my teacher. Like that's the first time we met. And she just goes, yeah, I believe in him. I'm gonna mentor him. He's gonna be at the community, right? And I couldn't believe my luck, because this was a high-end co-working space where like a membership cost a few €100 a month to use the facility, and I got to use everything for free and have her as a mentor for my university project.
Dude, the whole universe conspired for you. Whole universe was on your side.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Exactly. And
was
then,
that just curious, was that the community that you went to when you posted on your story that you were with a community of wizards in Peru?
no,
Or not Peru, in freaking Portugal. Sorry.
No. That was another side quest. That was when I was an event photographer in a crypto community. Right. That was so random. And there's so many great stories with that too. But that's how I kind of slipped into that route. I photographed the Israeli ambassador in a villa in like the fancy street in Portugal, because he gave a talk on business relations between Israel and Portugal. It made no sense. It's one of those moments where I had no idea what was going on. But to get back to the other story, because then after half a year, I wanted to move to the Azores because of also some personal situation. I wanted to film my bachelor thesis there. And so now I had to convince my teacher again, being like, hey, I'm going to move away from that community to go film this, and it's going to be my bachelor thesis. And he just goes, well, that's not going to work unless you're going to stay in touch. And Ines just said again, yeah, we're going to have meetings online.
What a genius.
I love her. I love her so much. I'm still
praise.
talking to her every now and then. And yeah, she's a real one. And, you know, it's so great. I'm so grateful in general too. And I'm sure you had those people on your path as well that just gave you that. And if we're talking about university experiences, because if you bring this up, I'm really, really just... I want to know what it's like to study philosophy, because that sounds so cool to me. I would have much rather, like now looking back, I mean, it is what it is. I'm grateful for what I've done. However, philosophy, I'd love to study that. How was that, man? Because you also barely talk about it.
I mean, I had a pretty strange and kind of all around weird start for my philosophy and college journey. I did not start in philosophy at all. I kind of got into it in like my sophomore year, I think, or junior year. No, I think sophomore year. But man, like looking back, I think I would have definitely liked to do more stuff that I didn't get a chance to do, like a thesis like you did. I would have definitely loved to do that. But in general, in terms of how it is, I think it's really like any other like field of study, but you're just studying something you enjoy. I remember I think my first class that I had, because I wanted to like I was curious about it to try it out, was philosophy of mind, which is about the philosophy of just what the mind is, how it relates to the body and reality. And what you do basically is you study the history of the philosophical arguments that have been given to support certain viewpoints, which are like answers to big questions. So let's say with that, the philosophy of mind, the big question could be, what's the relationship between the mind and the body, or what's the relationship between mind and matter? And then they pretty much teach you, I guess, like the different philosophers, what they have said about it, at least the most known ones, and the most notable like ideas that arose from the arguments they gave. So I guess it could be like the most famous materialists and what they said, or the most famous dualists, like Rene Descartes, which was one of the most famous ones, that he said, famously, that the mind and the body are completely separate things. The mind's immaterial outside of time and space. The body is material and extended and in time and space. And then different people, and then because it's like philosophy is really like a conversation between people, and that's how philosophers like try to come closer to the truth when they object to certain things philosophers reason about. So like when Rene Descartes said the mind and the body are separate, and he gave reasons to support that, I think one famous person that objected to that but also had like conversations with him was Princess Elizabeth, or something like that, some princess that he was having like he was sending letters to and correspondences, and she said like, oh, Descartes, you have this idea of the separate mind and body and the pineal gland as well. He also talked about that. But one thing I can't fathom or I can't understand is how some immaterial soul could ever interact with this material body if it's outside of time and space. And that's like, and then in philosophy, you study that as like a famous objection to this viewpoint that like gives it more reason to think it's probably false rather than probably true. So, and that's kind of how you do it with a bunch of different big questions and ideas or answers to those questions. I guess it could be like for God, like what are the most famous, the question about whether God exists and what the nature of God is. What are the most famous like arguments to support the existence of God in philosophy? And we study that. So like there's a bunch of them. And you kind of study a bit of the history, like I said, so like who proposed that argument. But yeah, it is pretty like analytical and intellectual. But it's fun because you study something you're probably curious about,
Okay.
Like I was interested in the mind especially, and also religion and stuff. But I think one thing I didn't mention as well which is what I think gave me a lot of practical value that I learned in philosophy, studying it in college, is trying to form my own arguments and give my own answers to those big questions based on, what other people have said. You like respond to them. They're like, some guy said, oh yeah, the mind is this. And you're like, oh yeah, those are some good reasons, but here's one objection that he didn't think about. Or yeah, I support this. And you give other reasons to support it. So it can really help you form your own beliefs better and give more support to your own beliefs, and also realize that your beliefs aren't as well founded as you might have thought, because you might have thought before coming in, like I don't know, I could have been like a dualist that thought the soul was some separate thing and the body was this other thing. And then studying the history of the philosophy and studying how there's many different objections to that, I might realize it's not as well supported or some other viewpoint. So I think it's really that, but yeah, it's enjoyable. I don't know, what would you have expected it to be like?
I'm not sure. I mean, I kind of that, just studying different philosophies and making it a conversation. But what was your thesis then? Did you have to write any own philosophy, or was it like
No, I wanted to do a thesis, but that's something I didn't do because and for my major it's not required. It's some optional thing. Like you could do it if you want to as like some extra thing. But I wanted to do it initially and I had one idea, but then I realized it was too much because I was trying to do content as well and focusing on other stuff, and it would have just been way too much trying to write a whole monsoon of whatever I would have written, because I was still working on like the ideas for my book. And I think what was the thing I was trying to support? And I think I had a bunch of different ideas that I like presented to my philosophy advisor. I think one of them was like just in general, things about like different connections between religion and science. Like I think one of them was about like how quantum physics relates to some things that a bunch of different religions say about the nature of what's at the very basis of reality. Because quantum physics says like it's just vibrations and a bunch of, you know, the quantum fields bubbling and then energy going in and out of existence almost because of like something called matter and antimatter, because matter supposedly also has like an evil twin, I guess, that they kind of like arise in pairs, almost like the yin yang symbol. And for some reason, when they arise, they always arise in those pairs, but as soon as they arise, they like annihilate each other, because it's like trying to add a +3 and a -3, you just get 0. So it's like when supposedly when quantum fields, which is like some very foundational stuff in reality from which supposedly everything is made, at least in a certain theory, that some like little particles arise from that. So it could be like electron particles, and but those particles have like their anti-electron, so like the opposite, their evil twin. And you know, when they come out of the field, one electron comes out, but also its evil anti-particle twin, and then they just instantly get poofed out of existence. And that was just one thing I found just researching science stuff. And now supposedly just the base layer of reality is full of those like almost like zaps or blips of energy all the time. And I was reading some book, I think it's called The Secret Teachings of Tibetan Buddhist Sects or something like that by oh yeah, I think we talked about that, and you said you might have read the girl that wrote that Longden, Yama Longden. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
did.
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
forgot
we'll
her
talk
name.
about that. I think it's something long. Yeah, I forget. But supposedly the Tibetan Buddhists through their own through their own like mystical path to knowing the truth, which is, I guess, they try to meditate and they reach some deep insight about the nature of reality. They theorized that at the base layer of reality, there's just these zaps of energy coming in and out of existence all the time. And that's pretty much what reality is just made of entirely, just these like energy zaps and everything. Like, because even when you look at atoms, that's kind of what they are. And they just the electron, the proton, the neutron, they're just like little bits of energy that just maybe like supposedly there's some other idea in quantum physics that does say they just like annihilate and appear and disappear. But it's so weird that like the Tibetan Buddhists came to that same conclusion through their mystical means. And I just thought that was pretty cool because they had this idea, and then I found it in quantum physics as well. And then I found it in some supposedly books channeled by aliens that said that the base layer of reality, there's just what they call the pulse energy, which is instantly coming in and out of existence all the time from what they call the source, which is like just some very big energy ball, or like I guess the big source of all the energy, and all the little zaps of energy come from that. And yeah, I just thought that was pretty cool. I wanted to write about how they could be connected, maybe how each of those different people arrived at the same conclusion through different means. Like science did it through studying things scientifically with observations and experiments, and then the mystics did it through meditating. And yeah, I thought that would have been a cool one. Because
Man,
then
that
I
would have
also
been.
found connections in Hinduism, because the Hindus also talked about this whole idea. They have the whole idea of Om, and that God is sound. There's the saying called Nada Brahman, which just means Brahman is sound. And Brahman to the Hindus is like God, but to them, God is like the ultimate reality, like the very foundation of everything. And at the same time, it's what everything is made of, like the being of everything. The very substance of reality is God to the Hindus, which I thought is it's also pretty cool.
That is really cool.
So yeah,
I would have loved to see what the university would have done if you just quoted or just sourced channeled aliens in an academic paper.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like,
Man,
oh yeah, top level science, just APA quoted in, you know, and they're just like
and then
channeled by aliens.
channeled by the Andromedans. Source Andromedans and the Greys. But nah, dude, you'd be surprised. Like philosophers and scientists get into some pretty far out and esoterical things. Like I know there was some book I actually read, which was a PhD thesis, I think, titled Prometheus and Atlas by some guy called I forget his name. And he argued a bunch of stuff that I think we kind of talked about in our last podcast when we said, how do people get ideas when like different people around the world get the same idea? How does that happen? Is it something in the collective consciousness that just a thought like disseminates in the collective, or is it like some alien force sending ideas into the collective or whatever? And he actually studied and researched that second hypothesis or idea, and he has a bunch of like very cool research to support it. And I mean, it's so crazy because it's so weird that people like academically study that, and like even in the way they like write about it, it's like so academic, but yet they're talking about like aliens sending channeled messages about some advanced technology to like NASA scientists and a bunch of other people, which is like so bizarre. And I mean, he argued a bunch of other stuff too, which is very, I don't even want to talk about it because it's like so controversial. But what was the thing? I'm trying to remember. What was the thing that you researched and from the lady that I was talking about from the book about the Tibetan Buddhist secrets?
I mean, first of all, I want to say that Max perfectly timed his jump with when you said ideas come from simultaneously. You just made like a hand gesture as well, and that dog just like went on the bed.
Nice.
I think, I don't know if it was research, but it was a really weird book that I just found on the street, which I love when that happens, when you just find books randomly on the street or you just like for free somewhere. And it was a book about, I think it was called something with black magic, like Tibetans and use of black magic. And it was a story of like a bandit in the Himalayas who then kind of went down a spiritual path as well. And it was a really bizarre story, but she said that it's a real story that someone actually had told her. So that's the book that I read, but I'm not sure if there's any research attached to it. I do want to.
It might be. I mean, it sounds like it's connected to Tibetan Buddhism, and that's what because I think she had a son with a Tibetan Lama or something like that, or maybe he adopted a Tibetan like monk or something kid, and that's how she wrote the secret oral teachings of the Tibetan Buddhist sects, because it's supposedly like very esoteric concepts in a school of Tibetan Buddhism that is not, it's esoteric, meaning it stays within the school, it's not disclosed. But because she had a son that was in there, she was able to talk about it and publish about it. So maybe that's how she got the Tibetan Buddhist magic stuff too.
Maybe. She also, what I found crazy was this, I think it's this Belgian or French woman, and she lived in the Himalayas herself. Like she just lived in a cave in the Himalayas for 10 years or so. That's crazy. In the 40s or like 1940. Imagine you're just a woman from Belgium. How does it happen? You just live 10 years by yourself in a cave in the Himalayas. That's crazy.
What? And yeah, what was her reason for doing that?
That's a side quest. I mean, that's a main quest if it's that long, but that's crazy.
The main quest, yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts. That reminds me of like, I forget, like a bunch of different cool movies about stuff like that. I don't know if you've heard of like I think the 7 Years in Tibet or something with Brad Pitt, and then I think it like talks about the history of the Tibetan Lama right now. Not Lama, I forget what they're called. What's his name? Like the famous Tibetan Buddhist guy. Dalai Lama, yeah. The Dalai Lama. I think it's like a history of that. And because I mean the Tibetan Buddhists went through a bunch of very cruel stuff because I think a Chinese or some other country was like trying to invade them, and they, I don't know, they went through like a bunch of crazy stuff, like suffering, because I guess they were not trying to get taken over and, you know, let go of all their religious ideas and stuff like that, which is crazy how that stuff happens, and how people that are like so connected to their fundamental creeds or beliefs, like Buddhism is all about like compassion and the supposedly something called the Bodhisattva vow, which is to show compassion to all sentient beings and to help them awaken and enlighten. So like every being, like whether it be a worm or a human or anything like that. So I remember like from watching the movie, they mentioned how one Tibetan Buddhist Lama was like getting tortured, but yet in his mind, he was still like sending love and compassion to the people torturing him, which is, it's so crazy how you can really have that such a deep sense of unconditional love, or maybe the conviction in your belief or idea that you can not get, I guess, taken over by these other people and their own ideas, and
That's
to the
so
dark
beautiful.
side. Oh shit.
To the dark side and turns his camera off.
My camera turns off.
Okay, Bruno, damn. You turn to the dark side, huh?
I accidentally clicked the button that turns off the camera. Dude, the synchronicity is going on here.
That is crazy.
First Max and then the dark side reference.
Yeah, honestly, bro, that's crazy.
Wait, hold on.
It is a shame though how in this
There we
day
go.
and age that we still live in, but like the age we live in, we still have all of these conflicts due to religion and belief.
Yeah.
You know, because like Buddhism is such a beautiful example of just being compassionate. Although, I don't know, like it's also a bit controversial, but just the other day I was sitting in a park and these two guys approached me and were like, "Hey, can we interview you?" And I was just reading
Oh.
Meister Eckhart, you know, it's like I was having a whole, like,
You're
I was,
reading Meister Eckhart.
yeah, I was
Nice.
just having a good time. And they came to me and like there were two, it's tough to say. They were for sure, they were German, just had, I guess, some heritage in the Far East or the Middle East. Tough to say. And it's a big thing here in Europe, of course. And it was, you know, they just told me kind of the story between Israel and Palestine. And I don't want to dive too deep into the conflict because I'm not one that's into politics. I don't know what the fuck's going on there, you know. I just think,
I try to not look into politics either.
yeah, just any war is stupid. Just the way that he kind of approached the subject was just trying to say, okay, if the situation that happened between Israel and Palestine would happen in Germany, what would you say? What would you do? And it kind of also led to a point where how much compassion or this philosophical debate in general of how much tolerance you can give to the intolerant, right?
Oh, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And I remember that even a good friend of mine brought that up to me as well. I don't know who was it, Tolstoy or some other philosopher writer that also mentioned that conflict, and it's so tough. Where of course the goal would be to be compassionate always and to be tolerant of everyone. However, if you become tolerant of the intolerant, then it also just the society shifts to an intolerant society. Just because that will kind of win. So
It just goes to shit.
yeah, so
Pretty
how are
much.
you gonna do that? It's very difficult, I think.
Yeah. Maybe it's like you can maintain at least that, like try to understand, but at the same time, get them to understand your point of view as well, and how you could, I don't know, potentially change them. I don't know. Yeah, that's such a hard, because it touches on so many different things, like ethics and stuff too, like what's good and what's bad and relative to what.
And for who as well,
And
you know,
for whom, yeah.
because it's so difficult to say, okay, this is good for everyone. I don't know if that ever exists. I think it's always good for some group of people, but for everyone is really difficult, you know.
Yeah.
So it's Yeah, it's a really really bad dilemma. Another topic though, because we talked about books we find on the street. The other day I was in a gas station and there was a woman that had like a big basket of books, and she just said, "Hey, my dad passed away and he had so many books. I kept a lot for myself, and now I just want to give some books away for people." And it was a really sweet conversation, so I just grabbed some random book of a Swedish author, Henning Mankell, and it's a book about, like, it's the typical police crime book, you know, but I loved it, and I just read it in almost one setting. It has 600 pages, and it's a fiction book, and it's but it just completely encapsulated me to a point where I thought was really interesting what had happened, because I found myself in my mind acting like I was, or my own story was part of the book that he wrote. So
Wow.
some strain of my thoughts were kind of labeled in the way that he wrote his book. So that was it. It turned really bizarre, where I just had to hesitate for a moment and was like, wait, hold on a second. Why am I
It's
speaking
like
in?
affecting your subconscious so much you're becoming the book almost in your
Yes,
mind. That's crazy.
yes. That was, I really realized again the effect of media and what it
Yeah.
has on people. And also wondering, because it's kind of like a crime thing, like how good is that to
Yeah.
consume? But that's just in general, and I found that so interesting, how that's so just much more obvious than with social media, or just a short video here and there, because you feel more drained, but you don't necessarily feel how much it really affects you in
Yeah.
regards to just being encapsulated in a book.
And what was it like? What was like the thoughts you had? Did it just make them more like evil or something? Or what was like the crime? Like what in what way did it connect to what you were reading?
I mean, the story wasn't, it was about the crime, but it was more so about the main characters, this really old detective, and he started to become, started to be close to retirement, and he felt super lonely, and you could really see the emotions. He suddenly had these bursts of not knowing where he was, like the beginning of Alzheimer's in a way too. And not that that happened to me, although today it felt like it when I was riding my bicycle. But I did. I would say they were more so as if I was narrating my own life rather than living
Oh,
it.
okay.
So,
Yeah.
because the whole book is written from a narrator perspective, where it's like, oh, he does this, and like stuff.
Dude,
So
I can
then,
imagine you like in your mind saying, and Philip picks up the coffee and he gets on his bicycle and there's a man staring at him. He looks evil. And you just make everything into like a very deep plot.
yeah, yeah, especially from an
That's it.
emotional perspective. And there's because I'm currently close to the sea. This is also the fourth podcast we create. This is the fourth different background. I'm always somewhere else. And
Nice.
there was this old Danish dude on his boat. He really looked like the main character, or how I imagine the main character, just sitting there smoking a cigarette, looking into the ocean. It was like a moment where I was just like, oh wow, okay, I see, the narrator voice going on, just like, oh yeah, now I'm on a boat, and I don't know how I got here, and this and this. And
That's so cool that books can like transport you into that as well. Because I feel like it's so like imaginative and it gets you into that like childlike mind too, where you can really get creative in how you like see things and the things you experience. Like it could be just I remember I think this is actually one exercise that you're supposed to do, I think for lucid dreaming or something like that, or there's something that you're supposed to do that tied to either lucid dreaming, astral projection, or something like that, where you have to do things like that. Like when you're just walking around normally, seeing people or observing things, you try to imagine like some very far out thing, like oh, like a dragon just flies over by, and you like kind of like almost like imagine it, but still try to like see it as if it was going to happen. like fly over, or you I don't know, getting like the Spider-Man web thing on your on your hands and swinging around from like tree to tree, stuff like that. Which I definitely I've done a lot. I think I did it because it was fun, and at the same time I was trying to do it for that technique. But it really gets you so much into that childlike sort of fun, creative space where you create your own little world in your mind, which is also tied to whatever it is that you're experiencing.
Oh,
Which
for
I
sure.
think honestly is what all of these like novelists and nonfiction authors do. You know, they create these fantasy worlds that they live in that might have been just part of their childhood imagination that they just conjure up, and then they're able to express it.
Yeah, true. Or just get inspired by people in their life or stories that they kind of like pick up. It's so fascinating too, because it also fits beautifully to a thought I also wanted to express when you mentioned the Belgian woman author. Because when you asked me like, oh, what book did you read? I had images in my head about the plot of the book, but it's a book. It wasn't words that I remembered. It was scenes that I
Yeah,
never saw but imagined back
yeah.
then when I was reading the book. Isn't that weird?
That's
That's
how supposedly that's how we remember the most, like through stories and pictures. And whenever, especially like I don't know what's happened to you, but like when I read a nonfiction book, the best way I remember something, or the thing I remember the most, is just when they like tell it in a sort of story that makes you imagine whatever it's going on. Like, oh, the guy walked into a coffee shop and there were some two dudes in there. One had a a pony by his side. The other had I don't know, some like weird thing, but it makes you just like see it in your mind in the way that you would subjectively imagine it, because obviously you imagine that based on your previous experiences of what a coffee shop looks like and what a pony might look like and what a man might look like. But it's still like it like creates something like in the mind, in the brain, with the neurons that makes that experience just more memorable because you see it as if you are actually experiencing it. Because in a book, you're like reading words, you're not like living the actual experience that's happening in the book. But when you imagine it, it's almost as if you actually do. Because it's like an imagination is just an inner perception. Because like right now we perceive with color and sound and sight and all that. And then when you close your eyes, or even without closing your eyes, and you imagine something, it's the same sort of qualitative feelings of seeing, even hearing, or sound, but it's just in your head. And it's like you experience a world, but in your mind. And maybe that also makes you remember, because maybe we remember experiences more than intellectual stuff. We just try to remember by, you know, like memorizing it with flashcards. So that could be it. I'm not sure.
I agree. I think that's also why, or I find it more difficult to remember scenes out of movies because it skips that imaginative phase. You just
Yeah,
see it
yeah.
at face value. It's
You see
almost
it,
like
yeah.
a book is kind of, you see it and it gets projected. But
Yeah.
there's a lens in between that's the subjectivity where you don't
Subject,
know
yeah.
what, you see how the bar with the two dudes and the pony looks like for you
Yeah.
and no one else. The bar looks different for everyone.
Yeah.
And as soon as that turns into a movie, even when books turn into movies, like Harry Potter, for example, I loved that as a kid, just reading all books. When it became a movie, the projector of the subjectivity of how Harry
Was
Potter
cut
looked,
off. Yeah.
yeah, it was cut off because then you just accepted what it
Yeah.
was in the movie.
Yeah. My mom also always told me that she didn't like that when like she saw a movie and she's like, "Oh, I never imagined the character like that. That's not him." And maybe
Yeah,
that happens for you too. Like you just picture someone in exactly the way you, I guess you would, based on your own experiences, and to you that just seems like the perfect way to represent that character. But it is weird. I mean, I don't know if you like researched into that, but when I was for writing the book, I researched a lot of like I guess techniques for writing and structuring and the way to best present ideas to make them memorable and engaging and convincing or persuasive. And one of the methods that's like very old, it goes back to even like ancient Greek philosophy, and supposedly a group of philosophers called the sophists, which it's like almost like a debate in court where they try to convince someone of something by appealing to emotions and stories and things that like appeal to their heart rather than their intellect, their mind. So it is really based on emotions and stuff that just makes you feel or imagine, which is what stories kind of do. When you imagine something in your head, it's inner sensations or emotions rather than logic, which is A leads to B, which is like just words and stuff like that. But yeah, related to that, there was a cool thing. I don't know, it might be helpful. I guess for some people, maybe for you too. I guess for as a technique for others that try to look into it, that it's called, I think it's called, they divided it into like 3 words. Ethos, which is, I think represents like credibility and someone's like authority. Pathos, which is emotion and appeal to the heart, which is with stories and things like that. And then logos, which is appealing to the intellect, when something logically makes sense and fits together well and has all the facts and the things like that. And that's kind of also why studying that structure of how to present a certain idea in a book or even in like conversation, especially in like a debate, when you're trying to convince someone to believe what you're proposing or concluding, I think it's cool to have that sort of in mind where you can rely on facts and logic and all that with like listing evidence and scientific stuff and making your claim just logically make sense with reasons. But you also, there's something in the mind that needs something more, not the mind, but just the human in general, because we also have like a heart and emotions. And the way to convince someone is really appealing to that with like a story or something memorable that just appeals to their own experiences, maybe stuff that they believe. So you could talk about present an idea in the way they might interpret it. So like appealing to whatever resonates with them. But yeah, I just thought that's like a cool thing that relates to this whole thing about stories.
Oh, for sure.
It's very used by authors and I guess debaters as well.
I think so. Another great example for that would be advertising as well. You don't see advertising that appeals to logic. Its advertisement always appeals on how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
Like the best ads aren't about the product, it's about the situation the product gets used in. I think alcohol advertisements are the best example. It doesn't matter what you drink, but it's the moment and the emotion that's conveyed. That's the experience that's kind of making you want to buy it, I guess. It's just crazy. It's crazy how many
it shows you your desired situation with like the alcohol. Like I guess they show like a scene in like a frat house with a bunch of people like doing cool stuff. Like, oh yeah, this is something I'm sure you would want. So they're presented in that way to appeal to something you would want to experience, I guess. But yeah, that's true. I think it's used. I didn't realize that it is used in advertising.
Big time.
Yeah.
And it gets even weirder and like a bit more. You went to the dark side again. Even more sinister when we talk about how it's used where I guess, I mean, it's fair that it exists, but for example, dating apps, right? Because of course they appeal to an emotional point in us, yet also kind of like a need for the human being, and they count on desperation and loneliness, which is really weird. Really weird. I saw an advertisement today from Gunna, the rapper, right?
Yeah.
Gunna made a video. Yeah, exactly. He made a video saying like, "Oh, oh yeah, guys, if you go to university, go download Tinder and swipe up to join the Tinder University Challenge. And if your college swipes the most, I'm playing a concert there. And it was just, man, what? Like, what?
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 What has this man become? My favorite artist has turned into a sellout.
I mean, no, it's fair, I guess. Just saying, it's strange. It's just bizarre, and that's
Yeah,
a
it is
better
weird.
example because it's not necessarily about desperation. Just there's so many ads that just appeal to the most desperate corners of the
Yeah,
human psyche to just
yeah,
suck all the energy out of them. It's just really
yeah. But like the most
sometimes.
basic needs. I also read that in, I think when I had a class in marketing, that's one thing I think they talked about too. It's just like presenting like a baby product and then appealing to the basic need of the mother, which is security for their and the health of their child. So saying, oh, when you get this, your child will be healthy. They won't get these stuff. Instead of appealing to like some less essential need. I think there was some either our anthropologist or sociologist or someone else, I forget his name. I think it's Manny Slow, something like that. He had the concept called the hierarchy of needs, and it's like it goes from like a pyramid almost, you know, those pyramids like with the like how the food chain is normally presented or something like that, with like a base layer that's bigger and then it keeps going up. So it shows it in that manner, and like the bottom is the most basic needs for all humans, which is I guess health and yeah, life, just life, being dead and not alive, and how you can do that. And that's what the most successful products usually appeals to, stuff like that. So products in health and medicine. And then it just keeps, I'll look it up because maybe I can even share the screen.
That would be dope.
Hierarchy
I'm
of
just thinking,
needs.
like, I'm super excited to see this pyramid. Just in the
There it is.
meantime, it's just crazy that there are brands then, for example, really bad sodas that are just absolutely unnecessary, that are just making so much money and just selling
Wait,
so
what?
much of their product.
Wait, repeat that again. I was looking at the pyramid thing. What about sodas?
Well, share it with us. I'm just saying, because how are you gonna appeal just a shitty soda? I don't even want to name any brand, but I'm sure there are like 15 coming up. Just, I don't know, soda X. They're just, how is it possible that a soda just makes that much money because it's not part of any need?
Yeah, I mean, maybe isn't sugar supposedly more addictive than fucking cocaine or something?
I
I'm
believe
pretty
that.
sure. So I think that's just one of the reasons probably why. So yeah, I think this is just basically, let's
Yeah,
see,
make it
yeah.
bigger.
This one
Make it
looks
bigger.
nice. Uh so here in this pyramid, wait, can you see?
Oh man, this is pretty small. Can you not open that as like a new tab?
I tried to do it. Maybe it's, oh, I don't think it's showing. Oh, it's not presenting in the tab I opened. Hold on, I'll try it again. Then we got to work on our technical difficulties.
Yeah, man, especially if you want to do that reacting to old videos, which I'm
Yeah,
really excited to do.
that would be sick.
Oh yeah, that's
Okay,
beautiful.
so yeah, this is
Okay,
one like the most basic, I guess, physiological needs.
of
So
course.
like nutrition, shelter, clothing, and that's what they appeal to the most. That would get you to buy something more when it appeals to that, I guess.
Yeah, and if
And then it
we
just keeps going up the hierarchy. And it's crazy how the top one, which is like the one that's what you want to fulfill after you have everything else fulfilled. Maybe for some people it's not necessarily like that. At least for me, I don't think it's like that. It's the self actualization need, which I think for me is my fucking number one need.
Yeah, that's base layer.
They have the shit wrong for us, man.
Honestly, even with all of these models, I think it's also a very distorted and kind of a perspective view. Like, I don't
True.
want to get
Yeah.
too conspiratorial, but even the food pyramid, bro, that shit is so wrong. It's crazy. The food pyramid is insanely wrong. And this one, I would say self-fulfillment, bro, that is important.
Yeah,
And a
that's so
purpose
important.
as well. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
purpose, self-fulfillment, growth, that's
That's like
way,
one of the number one things people say, like, I want to feel like I have a purpose in life and fulfilled. And like, I guess my actions and behaviors are contributing to something bigger than myself.
yeah. And
And that,
safety needs. I mean, look at that, like structure, order, law, limits. I mean, maybe he has a good explanation for this, but I would say that's higher up the pyramid than,
yeah,
I mean, I get the even financial freedom and like security, stability is pretty important. Just I feel like this is getting more out of date the more we proceed in life and this generation, I'd say.
true. Yeah, I feel that too. Because I think a lot of people are just, especially if you take the idea that we're having like a spiritual mass awakening and people are like more geared toward that self-actualization and trying to contemplate more about reality and asking more questions and just questioning more and just being more curious in general and waking up to, I guess, deeper truths. Like that's what the self-actualization need kind of represents. And maybe maybe it just changes with like as in the history of humanity. Like before, when we were cavemen, we didn't have enough time to think about whether God exists or whether there's an afterlife or whether I don't know, consciousness is this or that. We just had to make sure we weren't eaten by lions and had like a cave that we'd go to keep ourselves safe. So we were more biased towards the, I guess, lower level needs, the base layer. I guess it could be more like base level needs. I guess maybe that's how the pyramid actually represents it. Like base level is just, yeah, like health and physical stuff. But yeah, maybe it changes with time and culture.
That's fair. I would say shout out to that generation though. I was because
Yeah, shout out, man.
we started this podcast a little bit late because I got lost on my bike, and I because I try to do this thing where I don't drive with navigation. I just try to see, okay, I'm gonna end up somehow I'll make it. I just try to kind of remember the cardinal direction I need to go into, and I just follow that or certain waypoints alongside the road.
It's
And
adventurous.
it's also a lot of fun. Just realizing that though, yeah, I mean, I drove wrong. I miscalculated and I took a long detour. That's besides the point. What I want to say is shout out to that old generation that didn't even have maps or internet. Like you go to a new city, you got to get a tourist map or you got to buy a book in
Yeah,
order to be able to maneuver around. That's crazy. Now, in seconds, I can tell you the biggest building, the population, where the best restaurant is.
exact directions too, like how you
Yeah,
can get there, how long it would take, what transportation you could take, and how long each would take.
yeah,
But
real
I feel like
life
that'd be
view.
so fun too, though. Like that using maps, like that just feels like so adventurous. Like going somewhere and instead of trying to figure it out with your phone, just trying to find a map and figure it out like that.
Yeah, and you explore a city way more like that. And
Yeah,
it's also kind of how we talked it about with the books. There's less of a instant projection where you don't have a map and a screen in front of you that you look at rather than the city itself. You know, when I
yeah.
drive my bicycle without a map, I'm just I'll drive and I look around way harder and I think way more about, okay, where do I need to go in order to get there? Then as soon as you have Google Maps or whatever, Apple Maps, doesn't matter, you have it in your hand and you just follow it blindly. How many times I've also seen tourists in Lisbon, because that was just a super touristic city, where just everyone was just hunched over their phone saying like, oh, okay, left here, and but they're not looking at the
looking,
city.
yeah.
They're looking at the
Yeah.
screen that shows them a
Oh,
map of the city. It's really
dude,
weird.
yeah. That's a good tip too, because I think if we want to, when we go somewhere, we want to be present to whatever it is, wherever it is we are. And I think I have had that happen where when I go to the gym, because I'm not very good with directions, I sometimes use Google Maps or whatever. And especially when like the first time I had to look at my phone, so I didn't really notice the whole path there, like the stuff around me. It's like you're not even there almost, because your attention is almost like a spotlight, where your attention is, that's what shines on the world, and everything outside of that, it's almost like in darkness. You're never aware of it, you never see it, even though it's like right next to your spotlight of attention. And I realized when I put like the headphones in and instead listen to the GPS instead of using like looking down at the phone, I could actually see like all the buildings I missed and some abandoned house and some dogs and all that. And it's crazy how much that like perspective and attention shift to like one thing, which is like looking at something like a bigger stimuli, takes away your attention of something else. One, instead of just hearing it, helps out more. So maybe for people, I guess we could do listening to Google Maps instead of trying to look at it, or really go with the adventure pirate route. Just get an actual map and maybe figure it out like that.
That's also really cool. I guess I do a middle way between that, where I look at the route once and I just look at waypoints. So I have it open on my phone. I'm like, okay, there's a stadium that I should cross at one point, and okay, I don't know, there's a building with that name. Maybe I see that, and then I just take it away, and I'm saying, okay, I'll go. And then I probably take 15 detours, not go the route that I looked at. Yet I'm somehow able, by just knowing, okay, I kind of need to go up, I need to go there, able to kind of do it. And if I'm really wrong, like today, then I look at the map, because I'm also just like, wait, hold on a second, I'm in the middle of nowhere. This is getting sketchy. I was just in a forest, I'm just from a city driving into a city. I know there was no forest that I went there, so then I was in a forest on the way back, and I'm like, okay, wait, hold on.
Was it like a cool like forest, like a big forest, or a patch, where there's just like almost like a park, or just a patch of trees, or it's actual forest?
I don't know. It was also dark, that made it also worse, because it was the sun wasn't out. There was just a full moon shining, which is really nice. Just not enough light to really guide my path. So it was more like, okay, now I'm on a bike with like barely functioning light going through a forest. Not the nicest thing, especially because I was never in that forest before. So yeah, but that's when I looked on maps and I realized I gotta turn around. This shit ain't working.
Nice, man. I want to adventure like that more. You could just go somewhere like how you've done in like the Azores and everything. I mean, and for Peru, we're gonna do that later on. We'll also have to talk about that it got postponed.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, that's gonna be fun, because
Yeah.
you have that adventurous sort of mindset.
I think life's more fun that way. But about
Yeah.
Peru real quick, because I think it's also important to mention. We had a conversation and we decided to push it to June, or it's not entirely decided yet, but just yeah, so some months into the future. I think it's just better that way because of all the time. It's also a pretty recent company that we're partnering up with. And yeah, so that's for everyone that's still interested. That's still going to happen, just some
Yeah.
month in the future.
Yeah, and we might add stuff to it too. I mean, we did mention the UFO site thing,
True,
but
true.
that was not as well integrated into the whole retreat setup and the itinerary, because it was like an add-on almost that I suggested, because one of the people from the retreat sent us a video of someone that went on the retreat, and then I watched their YouTube videos. Shout out to him, Soul of Jarrett,
G.
and he had another video about supposedly a petrified UFO site that you can go to in there in Peru, and in that site there was some Peruvian lady, and she talked about like the history of kind of the people's alleged contact with some extraterrestrial beings at that site, which they call the Punianos, which in Bolivia and Peru, I think it's the name for supposedly the Nordic aliens, and which are, I think, a race of aliens that a bunch of contactees describe, which are like very tall with like blonde hair and almost like light like bodies that are made of light, like almost like an astral body. And yeah, that's also very weird how people describe that, because it's like it feels so like unreal, because it's like sounds like just a human, you know. And how could that even be if this extraterrestrial being comes from another planet, and supposedly with us? This is something I thought about. I went a rabbit hole down because I in my anthropology class, when I did anthropology, was studying for that, I decided to write a paper about just the extraterrestrial the hypothesis of extraterrestrial cultures, like cultures that would be from other planets if they exist, and what would be required for them to exist. And for that, I realized I had to look at like biology and evolution, and if that could even potentially happen, where culture for humans arose out of billions of years of not only planetary evolution, but millions and hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, where a bunch of things had to happen for human culture to develop, and also for humans to develop. Like the dinosaurs had to be wiped out by the asteroid, which then gave rise to, I don't know, the rodent, I guess, era, or where the little tiny mammals that were alive during that time were able to evolve after a lot of time into more like forest type of animals, which then evolved in like monkeys and apes and then eventually humans. But it's like all that stuff, if you believe in evolution and all this stuff, has to happen for humanoid looking creatures to evolve on a planet. So like so many different conditions have to be met for there to be humanoid looking aliens from other planets. And not only that, that they actually have like culture and, you know, these technologies and things like that that are even past biology, because their culture, I think when I studied anthropology, I think they defined it as behaviors and ideas that are shared, learned, and taught, and that change over time. Because mostly in like biology and humans, it's like this culture is something that's shared with people and that's taught. It's not something that's passed on biologically, like, I don't know, like the color of your eyes or the how tall you are. That's something that you don't learn from your parents or from the people around you. Whereas culture, which is could be the customs, the clothes you wear, how you language, all that is just cultural stuff that you learn from other humans or from the society in which you're in. And it's crazy that some animals even have that. I mean, supposedly, like whales have their own culture because they teach whale songs to their babies, and they pass it on not biologically but through their form of communication, and a bunch of other animals. But yeah, it's weird because it made me doubt the whole idea that there is these extraterrestrial beings that look like humans when I looked at that whole I guess the logical necessities of what would be needed for there actually to be humanoid aliens or cultures on other planets. But
Yeah,
yeah,
for
that was
sure.
a whole rabbit hole.
It sounds like a whole rabbit hole. I mean, you are
Yeah, I
right.
liked it.
In the case, if we assume that life only develops in the way that we see it happen on Earth, then that
Sure, yeah.
needed to have happened. Although we don't know shit.
Yeah.
At
It
the
could
same time, like, yeah.
true. I thought honestly that maybe like evolution takes certain paths like because honestly how people describe these alien species like Dolores Cannon and I mean a bunch of other contactees, like if you look at the the classification of them, there's like some that look like reptiles but like humanoid reptiles, the reptilians that are like reptilian like, but they're also like they stand on their two legs and they have like almost like a human but they just have like a reptile looking thing. Or there's like the lyrans which look like lions but they stand on their 2 feet and have like a humanoid looking thing. So it's like what if on the different planets the same sort of general biological sort of species evolve, like mammals and reptiles and amphibians. But then what happens that turns them into something happens that turns them humanoid like instead of, I guess, the other form of species that could be where it's like more standing on 2 legs, have a larger brain, more cognitive sort of facilities. Because that's like what seems to happen, at least based on the contactee events and the stuff that people say in this sort of alien space. They describe like reptiles but humanoid reptiles, or lions but humanoid looking lions. So maybe something happens. It could be like an influence from other entities, because that's also not only a hypothesis in like the alien space but also even in science, something called directed panspermia, that life actually started on Earth based on a comment that either brought it here or no, directed panspermia is actually from another civilization that like seeded life on Earth. Panspermia just panspermia is not directed. It's like maybe when maybe some trace of life comes on a comet and then lands on Earth, and over time it turns into life forms.
Yeah, the mushroom thing again, right? Like the
Yeah,
idea that
that's
we come
one.
from mushrooms.
Yeah, I mean that's because mushrooms, supposedly spores, are able to survive in like very harsh environments, like
That's
very cold space. So potentially spores from like a comet could have came from another planet and they just landed on Earth, and maybe that's also why mushrooms are so bizarre and that's where they come from. But I don't know, because I mean you have to really look at the history of where mushrooms came from, like
But who
physically.
knows? But who knows that? It's like the octopus too. The octopus is also like a really bizarre creature that can't necessarily be explained from an evolution standpoint,
I
which is
mean, it
also
can if you
crazy.
look at just like core, obviously, because you can't like physically see an octopus changing from whatever other life form there was. But if you look at like let's see, what like scientists do is they put on their scuba gear and they go into the ocean and they start digging up the sand to actually figure out, they find little skeletons of like old ancient sea creatures, and some look like octopuses but they're just a bit different, and they just keep piecing these puzzles together where like, oh, one had less arms or had a different face but it still kind of has the similar structures to what an octopus has. And it's like through that they piece together that maybe an octopus evolved from these other creatures, but then one of these had like a baby that had a different structure than their parents, and that uh like passed it on to its children, and that's how different species kind of arise, because it's like when you change and then you pass that change on to, I guess, your your offspring or whatever.
It's but it's just so difficult.
Or
It's the chicken and the egg question all over. Like, because how are you really gonna say, how did a chicken or birds, or now we know or say that birds are the closest relatives to dinosaurs? How does a T-Rex turn into a chicken? You know what I mean? It's just
Yeah.
the whole thing is so bizarre. I think we just
I mean,
don't know.
yeah, I mean, but
Barely
like,
know
what
anything.
about it? What about it is bizarre? Because I feel like logically, when you try to see like instantaneous shift, obviously it
It
seems
doesn't.
impossible, but
Of
that's not how
course,
it works.
I
So
know, I
that's
know. Still, though, what was there first then? The chicken or the egg?
oh, I guess that I mean that whole idea. I kind of try to understand it as well. I feel like that is like there was another form which wasn't a chicken, like another sort of I guess something that wasn't what we would call a chicken, but it had a baby I guess through an egg that was like it could have been mutated or just something happened that made it change, and that became the chicken. So the first came the egg. Yeah, first came the egg because the egg came from another life form that wasn't that wasn't a chicken, but it gave birth to a chicken because of mutation or whatever.
I would say, or a question for you then is, how did that? Because if one deformed baby is a chicken, then how does that deformed baby turn into there just being chickens? You know what I mean? There needed to then
Yeah,
be multiple deformed babies at the same
yeah.
time that then came as like a
Not
chicken army, I guess.
necessarily. Not necessarily because what happens is you just those deformed chickens or mutated chickens pass whatever structures or forms they have onto their children, and maybe obviously because there may be no other deformed chicken, it's just that one, but there's the same other sort of bird-like species, and those two mate, and they still have a baby that's kind of more chicken-like than the other bird like species. And over time, I mean, evolution, it doesn't depend on whether like you like it or not. It's just like whether a chicken or something comes out. It's more based on whether that species is more adapted to its environment. So the only reasons chickens survived is because they had things that made them be able to survive more. So like what survives and endures in nature is what's more adapted to how like the nature and the environment is, which is not only in terms of competition, like if you have things that allow you to get more resources and mate and get more mates, but also cooperation. If you have traits that allow you to be more in tune with your environment, with like in the food chain and other species, like you know how like some species supposedly have these like symbiotic relationships where like a crocodile has these birds that like eat the food on its teeth, or these, I forget what they're called in English, but in Spanish they're called remora, which is like a little fish that like sticks on the bottom of sharks, and they eat also the food of the sharks. And the only reason those survive is not necessarily because they compete with other fish, it's because they cooperate with other species in their environment. So it's not just a battle, but it's also like a mutual sort of relationship as well, which I don't think is emphasized enough in schools when they teach evolution and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's a whole rabbit hole, but if you really analyze it, I think there's a lot of evidence that it's an actual thing, even though it's hard to understand, but when you try to understand it, it makes more sense. I mean, there's only three principles when you try to understand it, and I like to think of it in like an acronym. It's like a VHS, you know, VHS tapes.
Of course.
So like those three letters. V stands for variation. So there's variation in the environment. Obviously, there has to be things that are different. There can't just all be chickens. There has to be a chicken that's deformed or whatever. And H is for heredity. It has to be able to be passed on. So a deformed chicken has to be able to mate and pass on its deformities, or not necessarily deformities, but it could, and that's like really subjective, I think, is it could be like deformed, but in a way it also helps them and it makes them beautiful. Like a peacock could have been like a mutation that still, it's just so like that peacock's, dude, it's like so amazing. How is that a deformity? That's like a novelty almost. And
Of
also like,
course.
yeah, I mean, there's also this whole other rabbit hole that I actually don't think random mutation causes evolution. I think there's also like intelligence in cells and stuff like that and DNA that plays
Must
into it.
be. Yeah.
But that's a whole other rabbit hole. But tying into the three words, the three letters, yeah, variation with the chicken. There's chickens that are different. Heredity, which is the stuff is passed on, and then selection, which is the stuff that's passed on. The things that stays around is the thing that's more adapted to in its environment. That gets selected for by, I guess, natural, what's called natural selection or evolution. So whatever is most adapted to its environment has more what's often called like reproductive success. It can like reproduce more and then pass on its genes to its offspring, is what evolution sort of like selects. It's almost like when it came, I think it came originally from the word when humans used to select like different dogs, like when they mated, like let's say a pug and a bulldog to create a freaking whatever species of dog they want. So they selected those to create something new, and that's what like nature does, which is called, that's why it's called natural selection. It selects not based on. I mean, I guess that this is also something that my views are changing on, because I think selection is not necessarily random. I think there's stuff maybe that's like that tends to certain things, but yeah, that's the whole idea. Stuff is selected, and from variation that gets passed on
I
to
that
VHS.
was a really nice explanation. I don't think I've ever heard the VHS abbreviation, but it
I
makes a
came up
lot of
with it.
sense. Oh, that's nice, man. That's nice.
Yeah, I'm trying to explain it in like
that's a
books
good
and stuff.
acronym.
Yeah,
I like that. It's just for me, it's what you said as well. When we talk about evolution, for me, there must be intelligent design behind it. Because I don't think it can just be scientifically, in an atheist perspective, to me, evolution doesn't work. If you tell me a fish suddenly decided to walk on land, I don't care how many times that fish must have tried to, I don't know, go up in the mud and died, or went back and somehow made it, and then nature suddenly decided, hey, here you can actually have lungs. That doesn't make any sense. Or how if there were just reptiles and rodents, or just reptiles, how suddenly one of them was like, hey man, what if I fly? Like, what does that reptile do? What does that reptile do to start grow wings and be able to fly? I think, and how you said with the
yeah.
peacock, it must be that there is an intelligence behind it that creates this. Because
That
even
creates
with,
like the variation.
yeah, or that
Yeah,
that selects it. Because even with chicken, and if we stay with that example, and deformities, I agree, deformities can be benefits too. Just that we have chicken all over the world, and some of them, of course, due to merchant routes that were later established, yet there are animals that we just find everywhere in the world that have just suddenly, somehow, either because of Pangea or I don't know, more recent times, just made its way through. But just, I mean, there's a whole ant war going on that we are unaware about, which is also really fascinating. Watch a fascinating documentary about how an ant species from South America that's just more aggressive than any other ant species is just suddenly taking over the world because they're just attacking all other ant species. Just
big boss.
it's crazy. Just I feel like with chickens too, in order for that to happen, there must be a deeper purpose behind there being a need for a chicken and the time that it exists in.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, honestly, that's one of the ideas I also kind of like try to explore, because I think the cosmos itself is just very purposive, and it has like end goals, like how we have a goal to become something or do something. Whenever we do something, we do it with a certain goal in mind, usually, whether it be for our basic physiological needs to stay alive and so we get food, and or for our self-actualization needs, we study stuff to learn and become this, or to help other people. And I think everything in the universe has kind of that just basic need to perform something for a certain goal. Like and it's like we do it for like higher level goals for like society and stuff like that, that I think even synchronistically connects to how society works and stuff that comes out. Um, but I think like cells, I mean, there's this scientist called Michael Levin, who is he has a bunch of fascinating research in cellular biology and what he calls the collective intelligence of cells. How he basically proposed and is kind of showing that cells have their own unique goals, which is like to form an organ, and you can like do something to like make them, to perturb them from trying to accomplish that goal. So it's like there's one example that he gives, which is actually from a philosopher called William James, is in his book about psychology, which is like the foundational book about psychology, because he's the father of psychology, which is one to how to tell whether something is intelligent and has purposes and goals, or whether it's just dumb and not dumb, but just like unconscious and does nothing. And it's like the idea of what's it called? It's when they try to reach the same goal by different means. So like let's say like a magnet, when you have two magnets and you put a barrier between them, the goal hypothetically that the magnet has is to reach the other magnet. I guess like it's not really a goal that it has, but that's kind of how we might think about it. But you know, when you put a barrier between them, the magnets stick, but the magnet doesn't move and go around the barrier to try to reach the magnet. It's just still like trying to get, it's like it's not trying, but it's like just doing it because of like some force of nature or whatever. And obviously it would be we would think that it's like some alive conscious being if it suddenly got unstuck and it started moving up and moving up and moving up and then went around and then got stuck to the magnet on the other side. And what species that have intelligence do is they reach that goal by a different means when they're stopped by something. So he actually tested this with like cells, and he made them, because cells, what they do is they form the certain structures of the body, and you would think that they just do it mechanically, like a magnet almost, where it's like an automatic command where boom, the sequence goes on and they just do that. And if there's something stopping them, like the barrier and a magnet, they're not going to do anything because they're not intelligent. They don't know they don't have the even idea to go around to accomplish their goal by a different sort of means. But he realized when in his experiments that they kind of reroute their whole process and they change what they're doing whenever something wrong happens. And that's why the body can like heal itself and do all these other stuff, because it has like some innate intelligence almost to fulfill its goal, which is usually cells come together to create certain organs and to keep them functioning. And then the organs come together to create its own little system, which is like the organ system, which keeps that organ system functioning. And then everything else comes together to create this whole organism, which is a greater system of all the parts functioning together. But I kind of think like that's how the universe itself works, where like different parts have different goals that are interrelated, and they like create some bigger system above which is above itself. For humans, it could be like a society or a culture, and even bigger, like the planetary Gaia thing.
Yeah,
it's like the whole idea.
It's also a great argument, like for astrology in a way too, that there is a bigger purpose for the planets being in the place that they're in right now. I also find that interesting. Today, it's a full moon in Pisces, and this conversation has turned, I think, more personal than the other ones. You know, like more like dreamy, but also like personal, historically, but like about our own path and stuff. And now even about the very origin, or you know, like an explanation for it all, which very much fits to the sign. And I don't know, I always find that fascinating to see all of these things coming together. Even like the body is such a mystery, and a perfection, a work of art. There can be no human engineering that tops
Yeah.
the human and the body that we
Yeah.
have.
A
'Cause
cell. Yeah. Even just
it's,
one cell. I
yeah,
remember some famous biologist says if you want to believe in God, look inside cell or something like that.
yeah,
It's like it's just so incredible. Like everything functions in relation to everything else, which is why I mean I have different beliefs. I think there's no like external agent doing it, but I mean the cells themselves are the creators. I think the whole universe is just full of creative purposive beings. Us, I mean, and I think that's all forms part of the creator itself, which is the collective of all that. And maybe like at the origin, like some ball of energy that's itself creative and then goes out and lends out its pieces of energy to create different things. But I mean, we ourselves are creative purposive beings and then cells and stuff. But I kind of sidetracked so much. I was trying to remember what we were talking about, like evolution and whether, because that was also
and
good too. Because I think it's good to challenge our own beliefs as well and like find different arguments for them and see where we may be biased towards believing something just because that's our belief. I definitely had that for so many things, which is why I kind of looked into like critical thinking stuff too, where like realizing when you're just trying to you're not trying to, I guess, consider stuff because you have a certain belief already in mind that you think is true, rather than considering that it might be wrong. So you consider other beliefs or other options. So that's also a good thing. Like we got into personal stuff, but even that, which is beliefs, is like the most personal stuff ever. And especially if you get like into religious beliefs and stuff too, because a lot of beliefs are tied to identity and who we think we are. Uh, like Christians or Muslims or Jews, like whether the belief in a Judeo-Christian God or in Allah or anything like that, or in Jesus, a lot of that is just tied to their group communities and their sense of identity. Like when their belief in that Jesus is the son of God, or that Allah is God and that prophesies to Muhammad or stuff like that. That's not just a thought, a belief in their mind. It's also tied to an identity that they hold. Like they think I am this belief. I am a Christian. I am a Jew. I am a Muslim that believes this, and that just forms part of who they are. And so when you question it, it's like you're questioning them, when it's really not the case. When you kind of analyze what beliefs are, it's just a thought in your mind that you hold. But I guess in a sense you kind of are the belief, but at the same time you're not,
that was a
because it's just a
beautiful
thought.
explanation because it's true, right? And I think that's a big problem or in society as well, of people identify with things too much or too intensely. Even the whole idea of countries. I was
Yeah.
reflecting on that as well, where I shared about the interview with the two guys that interviewed me about kind of like the situation going on. It was the nationality or a heritage, but even that is just, it's not who they are, or it's not who we are. And I find that always so weird, especially in terms of countries and all the things that are going around with it, of how you're allowed to travel to these places if you're
Yeah.
from that place, but how you're not allowed to travel to these places if you're born in that imaginary border that was drawn by some, I don't know what makes a country border. Just it's really bizarre that these identities that are self-imposed are so strongly enforced in our minds that we cannot break out of them. And every time we do and we challenge that own identity that we have about ourselves, there's so much growth and wisdom to be found there as well. It's
So
really
much.
so beautiful if you can really look at it from an observant point of view and not
Yeah.
one that's emotional and so close by it, but rather from a bird perspective and seeing it like, oh, that's funny. Some years ago, I really identified myself as someone who doesn't go to the gym. And it can be minor things. And of course, there are bigger and smaller identifications we give ourselves. just it's so fascinating to see how if you really ask yourself the question, who are you? It's so difficult. I remember there's this
It is
really
so
good
deep.
clip of Bob Proctor, I think, and he gives this lecture and he's just saying like, oh, who are you? What are you going to say? Your name, your
Yeah.
country, your occupation? That's not who you are. You know, it's you
I remember.
literally saying my name is Philip. Who's
Yeah.
my? You know, and
Yeah.
that's so profound because I remember I was at a festival last or 2 years ago, and I went to that festival. It was like a psychedelic psytrance festival, and I told myself, okay, I'm gonna ask myself the question, who am I? And through this entire festival, I just came back and was like, who am I? And I couldn't find an answer. I just couldn't. And I realized after this whole time that there is no answer to be found. Because I feel like every time you have an answer, you lose it. Because it can't really be defined. It's similar how it needs that projection from the book in order to become an image in your head.
Mm.
It's kind of like that with self-identity, but it's just it is. But you don't need to name it. It just exists. But who you are is very difficult to get to the core of because yeah, I mean, what's your answer? Who are you?
Cool. No, I was about to say just that I love that question, and I think it, to me, like personally, based on my own journey and experiences and stuff I've looked into, I really tie it back to like especially Bob Proctor's video. It is the whole idea of the self-inquiry, especially asking that question in a school of Hinduism called Advaita Vedanta, and some guy called Ramana Maharshi or Maharishi, and they asked that question from the perspective of Hinduism, where there is this central self that all of us supposedly are, that isn't all the surface level stuff like the body or the mind or what we do or all that stuff, because all that stuff can be called into question with certain inquiries that you give, like with Bob Proctor. Like your name, like when you say, oh, who am I? I'm Bruno, but Bruno is a name that was given to me when I was just a little baby. Who am I? I say, well, I'm Mexican. Well, that's something that was, I guess, based on, I guess, where I was born, and that's a certain another name that's given based on the government and the cultures that are there. Or, and I say, who am I? Well, I am. Then there's just a bunch of stuff, and you could say, just even in conversation and in the way we talk about ourselves, we say, I'm going to wash my body, or I think this. So it's like you're never identifying with the body or the thought. You're identifying with the I. But what is that I that you're identifying with? And in I mean, in Hinduism, they give the perspective that it is this thing called pure awareness or pure consciousness or the observer, which I actually just made a blog post about last night. And I did like an inquiry that you can do, a meditative inquiry, where there is this very subtle element in consciousness that is almost like behind everything, like behind thoughts, behind emotions, behind sensations. And it is neither of those things, but it is the very thing which experiences all of it. Like the, it's like, it's so hard to describe because it's like the most fundamental thing, literally. And it's like, I always try to think of it like, it's when like trying to find it or look for it is like a flashlight trying to shine a light on itself, trying to shine its own light on itself. Like if the spotlight, when it shines a light, it shines it on objects, on external things, but it can never find its own light because that's what it is, like in the most deeper core essence. So it's like Alan Watts once put it, like it's like trying to bite your own teeth. It's like you can't like go back, and the observer can't observe itself or the awareness cannot become aware of itself because it is the very thing that is awareness, that is aware, and that allows us to become aware of everything else. So I mean that observer idea is one thing that I would give to as the answer as to what am I. I could refer to that awareness, which is it's like, I mean, it's so hard. There's like nothing you can point to even try to describe it, because it's not an object, it's not a thing, but yet it's still like some basic awareness that allows you to experience thoughts, emotions, and sensations, but which is not a thought, emotion, or a sensation. So like right now, I'll try to briefly kind of explain the meditative inquiry I gave in the blog post. So right now we are aware of many things at once. So you're aware of the sound of my voice, which is a sensation. You might be aware of the headphones plugged in to your ears and feel that. And you might even be aware of verbal thoughts in your mind, like, oh, what the hell is this dude saying? Or whatever. No, or I mean, verbal thoughts, sensations, or even an emotion like, oh, this is exciting, this is cool, and you just feel it. And you're aware of all that simultaneously. But what is the thing that is actually aware of that? It can't be like a thought that's aware of other thoughts. It can't be an emotion that's aware of the emotions and the sensations. And it can't be a sensation because it's simultaneously aware of sensations and emotions and thoughts. So it's the thing that is aware of everything, but which is not itself something of that you are aware of. That is awareness or pure consciousness, which is the most fundamental thing in conscious experience, but which is why it's so hard to see and describe and point to, which is also why a bunch of the inquiries in the Hindu texts and even in other religions, instead of trying to point to what it is, they try to point to what it is not. And one inquiry that they have is called neti neti, when they say, oh, what is God? What is the self? Because to the Hindus, the God is that awareness, which is the very essence of behind my eyes, in my eyes, and also yours, and in every conscious being, supposedly. And when they fucking dark.
Man, you were spitting so much fire. Just the camera had to just turn
camera
itself
turned
off.
off.
It was overheating.
But supposedly like that, it's the same in everyone. And damn, I kind of lost my train of thought there. And yeah, one thing to try to like find it, because it's like so fundamental, is to say neti neti. It's like, it's not anything that you can point to. So it's like, it's not that, it's not this, it's not this, it's not, which means in neti neti in Sanskrit just means not this, not this. So it's like, not that, not that, not that, because it's like the very thing like in the back that is aware of everything, the observer. So it's not that, it's not that. It's like all the way. It's like hard because you can't point to it because it's this observing thing that's there. But yeah, that's one thing. And yeah, kind of that's one idea I really like deeply was convinced of, and like it's like a belief that was ingrained in my mind. And yeah, I even live so ingrained that I live life through that perspective, almost like trying to like seeing that, oh, really, there's this one observer that's the same in everyone, and that is God. And what I really am is that observer. I'm not Bruno. I'm not my body. I'm not my mind. I'm the observing awareness that's behind all that, that's experiencing this body and mind, as well as experiencing your body and mind and the ones of my dogs and of other creatures. And I like kind of saw life through that perspective, which is that I think that's one telltale sign that you're so ingrained in a belief. When you start acting from that if that belief is true, what would you do? And I just started seeing people in that sort of way. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy because it's so hard to kind of understand, but at the same time, when you kind of understand it, it also can become like kind of freeing. Because if you read the book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, he kind of tries to say that when you identify with the observer, nothing can like harm you or feel bad anymore, because you no longer identify with your thoughts. Instead of thinking, look, when you have these negative thoughts and about whatever maybe that's bothering you, instead of identifying with those thoughts, you're like, no, that's not actually me. There's just these things that are passing on the mind. Dogs.
Yeah.
And it's the same with like other sensations and emotions and all that, which is kind of like the idea that Eckhart Tolle somewhat gives. I mean, he gives so many other things, but that's also tied to Hinduism, because there's a book called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is very like 2,500 years old. And he gives like a daily techniques that you can do to almost completely like notice the observer and pure awareness so much that you completely detach and misidentify from the body and thoughts, and start living from the detached perspective of the observer, as if you are no longer even your body or your mind and you're just watching it. And supposedly some meditators can't even get to that point where they actually stand back from that perspective, and they like just feel like when the body is moving, it doesn't even feel like they're doing it. Like they're just the observer watching when the body does things. Which is so weird to think about, how you can actually get to that. And supposedly it takes a lot of practice, but you can do it. And yeah, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole, but I honestly think I would never want to do that, because I kind of think what I think is peaceful and freeing is not to detach from your body and the mind, but to fully experience the body and the mind, because it is experiencing what it means to be a human and what it means to be alive. It's like experiencing the roller coaster of life itself, which is all these emotions, all these sensations, seeing colors, hearing sounds, hearing the voice of your loved ones, touching things, feeling pain and pleasure, feeling joy, happiness, sadness. All of that is just part of the human experience and what it means to be a conscious being, especially this type of conscious being that we are. And I think what I don't like about those like spiritual gurus that kind of try to say that you should live from the detached observer perspective is that they try to get you away from that. They say, oh, don't even be detached from thoughts, from sensations, and just be the observer that just watches it. But at the same time, there's so much freedom and peace and experiencing all the complexities of life. And there's even a certain mindfulness to that as well. I don't know if you've like tried it, but like mindful eating, where you like close your eyes and really try to taste the taste of food, or even when I shower, like really feel the coldness of the water or stuff like that. And that's like a whole other type of mindfulness that's not the same as the observer sort of mindful experience, but which is still pretty freeing and peaceful. And yeah, man, but I kind of went on a rabbit.
Man, that was a beautiful, beautiful segment. Honestly, I was just this whole time I'm just like sitting here, like, oh man, this is like you really dropped some big wisdom here in so many different ways. I thought this was so beautiful. Like first the
Thanks, man.
explanation of you can't bite your own teeth, and then even spinning that around where you can actually bite your own teeth if you really want to, but it hurts and it's not worth it.
Yeah.
And I really like that curve. It just explained the whole thing really beautifully. It was such a good
Thanks, man.
answer to the question who you are, because in a way, that answer was, of course, also part of who you are, yet it also gave a statement as to what that represents on a deeper level. So that
Yeah.
was, man, that was special.
Thanks, man. I mean, yeah, it's just based on the stuff I've learned, because it's all, I mean, any answer I always think about it like that. Like any answer we give is just like kind of cocktail of all the things we've experienced and learned about,
Yeah.
and just jumbled together into one statement or a couple statements. And
For
it's
sure.
beautiful, because that means everyone can give a unique take on any answer or any question,
Yeah.
because everyone has unique experiences and knowledge, and the answer you give is based on everything you've learned and experienced, and the one I give is based on what I've learned, and it's like a unique new perspective on the question.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah,
I really really love the answer of Jorge Luis Borges, this Argentinian poet. And he once said that to the question of who he is, he said, "I am all the women I've ever loved, all the cities I've ever visited, and all the
Oh, I love
books I've
that.
ever read." And I really like that because it's such a true answer to this as well. That doesn't take it so metaphysically, but rather just from a human experience, anything just leaves an impression on us. Just absolutely everything. And
Yep.
that's so true. And you can't turn that off. There are impressions everywhere, and you are shaped by the impressions
Yeah.
that you experience just completely.
It
And
becomes who you are, literally.
literally, and it is who you are,
It is, yeah.
just from all types
Mindset.
of views, you know. And
Yeah.
so I really love that answer as well. It's just, I feel like it also meshes well to put together in like a very experience type of way that just puts the priority on anything that it means to be human and to really
Yeah.
observe, but not try to observe the observer, and just
Yeah.
observe and
Based on the
feel.
experiences, yeah. Yeah, I always like more of those answers, but I also like the metaphysical ones too. Like,
I love both.
yeah, I mean, there's so many answers to that question because it gets in like the idea of the self and identity, and that goes into so many rabbit holes. And I used to even think about this other one, which is the response that supposedly Yahweh or God gave in Genesis when it gave its name, said, "I am that I am." It didn't say "I am something." It just said, "I am that I am," which is kind of like a metaphorical way of saying, I personally think saying, I am not a being, like I am not this, I am not that. I am what it means to be. I am existence. I am being itself. So that's like another answer that I often think about, because that's kind of what I mean, not even I kind of also metaphysically, but just intuitively, we are existence. Like we are the universe right now. We are existence just appearing in this unique form that we are. At the most basic level, I am this form that I am, but at the same time, this form that I am is just it's some essence, some form of being, some form of existence. And then when God gave that answer, supposedly in Genesis, at least in this in this. I think I pretty much interpret it in that manner, like saying, like, I am everything. I am all that is, all of existence, every form that appears in reality, but also the source of them, I think. So it's like I am when it's because it's not God never identified with a certain entity or a certain thing. It just said, I am that I am, which is such a bizarre, like what if I would have said that when you asked me who am I? I am that
It's kind
I'm
of
sure.
hard. I'm
Yeah,
him. I'm
I'm him. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. That's
it's
also
also
another way
true.
to interpret it too.
Yeah, I'm him.
I'm him.
And
Yeah.
you could see that too. That, I mean, that's a pretty deep way to that statement, which I feel like is mostly not taken in that way. Just,
No.
it brings me to another, or like connecting to this. I was once on an acid trip with a friend, and we walked around and we saw an animal. And in that moment, we just saw the animals, and we both kind of realized and said it at the same time, like, animals just are. Animals are. Nothing more. They are. And with what you said as well, with like, I am that I am, or I am, is that it brings me to the question of, can humans ever not be, in a way that we as persons and individuals, can we go so far off the path that we continue to not just be, but rather just behave in a different
Or
way,
do?
existence in a way? Can we break that mold of existence for ourselves, or are we bound to it, and no matter what we do, we are?
Mm. Like in the form that we are, do you mean? Like, can we break what
I
would
guess,
we are?
I guess an example, animals just are. Animals exist, and they do so in their own way that feels uncontrollable to us. Just humans have, they are. Although they also have different personalities, of course, like dogs aren't different. Like every dog is slightly different and has their own way. Everything is unique, yet they are in a natural sense. And I wonder if humans just also are in that natural state of
Oh,
existence, or if they
okay,
can
yeah,
break out of that in a
yeah.
way.
So it's like what, like almost like habitual things that makes, like what makes a dog is like the certain things they do, like shaking their tail, and is that kind of what you mean? And that's like their mold, and all animals have that they maybe can't really break out of the mold, but can humans break out of their human like mold, something like that?
I mean,
Or
I
is it
guess
more?
I was also just on acid when I had that thought. just take that. And also, I think when it
I mean,
comes to
yeah,
when it comes,
there's one thought, but yeah, I'll,
I'm excited to hear it. I feel like when it comes to these conversations, and I'll let you speak on this in a second. It's also just, it reaches a point where words also become very difficult.
yeah.
With that being said, I'd love to hear what words you have to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I thought of, but I didn't say anything about it, is one thing that I think kind of connects to it, which the psychedelic experience kind of gives you, but also the childlike state of mind gives you, is when you experience things as they are without any labels and concepts, and just like nothing is like a dog or a tree or anything. You just, instead of like experiencing it and trying to conceptualize what it is and put it into boxes and saying, oh, this is a dog and it does this and does that, you just experience its givenness the way that it is, in the way that it is, with its unique patterns, its colors, its details. And you don't try to conceptualize it like at all, like in any sort of way, which is what a really baby child would do, where they don't have language, they don't have anything, and they just experience a tree and they observe like every single, like its patterns, its colors, and they're just like, wow, this, just look at this thing that just is. Or then they just like get filled with wonder and awe because they don't conceptualize it in any way, they don't put words to it, they just experience it as it is, literally, without any obstructions of mental labeling or conceptualization. And maybe, I don't know, because that's what I've heard people say oftentimes in like an experience in psychedelics, where like they just observe at a fruit or a chair and they get like taken in by it because they completely let go of any conceptualization about it, and they just like observe it in the way that it is, and they notice its patterns and this little spot that it has and the way the light shines on it. And it's like, it's the most simple thing, but at the same time it's also so profound and so powerful because it allows you to see things as they are, and that can bring you a lot of like awe, because things are amazing and beautiful, and especially in their unique essence, their form of being. And yeah, that's kind of the tangent I had in
That's
mind
a
with that.
really good answer. That's a really good answer. I think the human conceptualization is that what breaks it out of the mold of just being. Just this inept ability to break it down and to just look at things and label it and
Yeah,
have thoughts towards it rather than just accepting for what it is. So
yeah.
man, that's the answer right there. On on
One
that
of them.
note, because it one of them, that's also true. It brought me to just something, just randomly, very conceptualized, but I laid in bed last night and I was just looking around the room and I realized everything that I see in this room was made by humans at one point or another. And that is so crazy. I mean, except for,
So
of
nuts.
course, yourself and the dogs, right? anything in your room, just someone made that mattress, someone made that cupboard, someone made the door,
That's
someone designed it, someone mined the materials, someone chopped that wood. Just how many human influences we have all around us in cities is absolutely fascinating.
yeah.
And that brings me back to 2
I love
points that I think tie it also really nicely together. And it's about Rudolf Steiner, the famous, I guess,
esotericist.
esoteric. I mean, he did so many things. He
Yeah.
wrote an incredible amount of books. And he said that the human psyche is really influenced by the amount of human soul that we see around us, and how the decline of craftsmanship is also the decline of the human soul, which I found really interesting. Which back in the day, you walk through a city, everything is handmade and everything carries the soul of its maker. Where
Oh
nowadays,
wow.
everything, where we come into a more stale and industrial age, and we don't have the handprint of the people that create these. We have synthetic fabrics, we have, just machines that produce all of these things. The handcrafted soul of the maker is losing its point in the world. And another point by Steiner, which was also something about you said about the Dolores Cannon thing, is that he said that there are beings on every planet, just develop differently. So on the sun, the beings are, just made out of gas and really hot, but they can still exist. Their consciousness exists. And it brought me to tie that to what you said about the Dolores Cannon thing, is just that imagine they're just fire lions, just consciously walking on two legs, but their form is different, or their attire, but the consciousness is pressed in that mold in that same sense. Yet the handprint of the maker of the universe is still within a different form, and perhaps not industrialized. That was a weird way to merge the two things together, but I don't know if it really works, but they stand maybe better as by themselves. I just still wanted to mention that because I just
I love
remember that.
the perspective, like especially what you said about like the how everything carries the soul of its maker, and I like almost you could see everything in your room as like someone's own creation, and like they are part of the history of that object, and in some way they are that, like a part of them is just there. And
That's
like
what they
this
are.
whole
That's who
room,
they
it's just
are.
like you're never alone because there's like pieces of someone else's mind all around you all the time.
If walls
And
could talk.
human creation. Yeah. and and that I love that because I also tied it to like this whole idea that I think everything almost like exists not just in space, like this is here right now in this moment, but also in time, like it has a history to it. And this could not be without this phone in my hand, could not be without Steve Jobs having the idea of a phone, and without people before him having all that technology. And there's like a whole history to every single object in the universe and every structure, especially like a human body, especially if you think about like evolution. This could not exist without billions and billions of life forms that had to arise, or dogs, or I mean everything. And like every object has like the imprint, the soul of almost like the entire universe within it too, because even this phone or us, we have molecules that supposedly came from stars, were birthed in the hearts of stars. So we are not just us, but at the same time, like the entire process of the history of the universe culminating in this point and expressing itself as this unique form almost.
We are
So it's like,
everything that ever was.
but just appearing as like this unique thing because it's both expansive, as in it takes into account everything that has happened, but at the same time it's everything that has happened compressed into some unique form, new thing that is based on everything that came before. Because you obviously are like, you have a unique structure to you, a unique brain that has unique experiences, a unique mind that makes you who you are, based on not only the evolution of the entire planet and the molecules in your body that came from stars, but also your parents and the culture that you're part of in Germany, and everything just compressed into you. But at the same time, you're completely unique, like a unique expression of all that. And I mean, like anything else in nature, like a tree, we marvel at how a tree could be different, or like a dog or something else is just unique in the way that it is. But we are all that, like unique expressions of nature in a way that tie back from to the very beginning of the universe, but yet express themselves like the universe is expressing in this unique form in so many different ways, which is kind of tied back to that idea of that everything in the room has like a history tracing back to the person that created it. And in a way it is that, but at the same time it's something unique. It is like a little book or a little phone. So it is weird how that those two things come into play.
That's a beautiful answer to the question, who are you, though? Everything
Dude.
that ever was.
Yeah. Do you remember the sandwich quote? To create a sandwich, you have to recreate the entire universe. That's the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. The sandwich quote, man. It's so true. It still holds true. If you really want to make a sandwich from scratch, you gotta just create another universe. Recreate the universe.
The universe. Nuts.
It's nuts. And I think that's the absolute pleasure and pain of the human condition, that we can conceptualize so much.
Yeah.
That we don't see things just simply because they are or as they are,
or
but
as
we
they
rather
are,
just have this crazy ability to conceptualize everything that is. A dog, I mean, I don't know if a dog doesn't do that, but if a dog looks at a door frame, the dog isn't gonna think like, oh man,
It's got the soul of its maker.
Exactly. That's crazy.
And I mean, that's like probably a reason why you said the stuff about the saying animals just are, because they don't conceptualize. They just exist and live as they are, and they experience things as they are as well without conceptualizing. And I think that ties even to one of the very first things we talked about in our podcast, not this episode, but I think the first one maybe, about language. That language is, I think, the thing that enables us to do that, because we can abstractly represent the world in these symbols, and then those symbols can mean some very far out things when you piece them together. When you piece one word that has a certain meaning with another word that has another meaning, it comes together to create a new meaning that can be like so abstract. And that's the only way that we can actually literally conceptualize things. Without language, we couldn't do that. We would just,
That's true. That's true. And it's so, like, I wonder, with all of these things and with all new inventions or discoveries that are made, I feel like humans have a tendency to say, oh, now the internet is out, and that's not a good thing because humans are, this is gonna not go down a good path. And yet at the same time, it also feels same as with evolution. There is some intelligent design behind this, because in order for this conversation to be had, and for you to listen to this, just imagine all the processes that have gone into this, not just from our all own individual lives that has brought us here to this podcast, just the technical devices, the place you're in, even your own family, just the bloodline of yourself, all the coincidences, and then of all the objects as well. This is so bizarre and such a wonder that we're able to experience this.
That's one of the things I often always think about. Like, it seems so purposive because so many things had to have perfectly happened for it to turn out in this way. For us to be literally having this conversation, you had to have sent me the message you sent me in, I think, 2020 or 2021, when you hit me up through like TikTok, and then we talked later on for some other reason, and then we later collabed and then we did the Peru thing, and then eventually because of that we decided to make a podcast, and now there's people listening to us converse about the mysteries of the universe and wonder at it. And that could have not been without like so many little pieces of the puzzle coming together, so many, and that thinking about it in that way makes you think like, wow, there's no way that there isn't something like synchronistically aligning everything so it turns out in this way, or at least that's how it feels,
Yeah.
especially with synchronicities. And in a way, everything in life is a synchronicity, every experience you have, because it's so miraculous that it could have turned out in the way that it is. The fact that humans exist, that there's planets, that we are here right now, like so many things had to happen for it to turn out that way.
So many things. It makes the present moment and life itself, I also think, so special. If whenever I think about this, and just in this conversation right now, it creates within me this deep feeling of gratitude, of just to be able to observe and feel all that is. Because that's so special if you think about it. The astronomically small chances of you even being born.
Yeah.
And then you just put that through this whole time machine of all that ever was. And now you're here listening to this. Like that's,
The cause for celebration
honestly,
every single day,
yeah,
to just exist.
yeah. And it doesn't matter how bad you think your current life situation is. Just observe it and still be grateful for it, because it's also going to change.
Yeah.
Because
And
that's one of the
experience it.
rules. Everything is always evolving. That's the one thing that stays the same is that change is permanent.
Yeah.
Which is ironic.
It's so paradoxical. Well,
Yeah.
the one thing that never changes is change itself. Everything will always change.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so strange.
Man, I
Yeah.
could talk to you for 5
Yeah.
hours straight. I feel like
Yeah, we
every
should-
time we make a podcast, it's just getting longer at this point.
We should probably stop it now. But I think we had such a wonderful conversation, and I think this day especially, I think it's a new moon, or maybe it's not.
Full
It's not a
moon.
new moon. Full moon, and that represents gratitude as well, and being grateful, and especially everything we mentioned at the end really ties that together, where we just don't even have to appreciate luxuries and stuff, but just the very fact that we exist is a luxury in itself. It's so incredible that we can experience and exist as something, especially a human, because we can conceptualize these things and talk about it and do human stuff.
Yeah. It's
Even though it'd be cool to
incredible.
be something else.
Sometimes I do love. I just love life and the way everything is. But
Yeah.
this conversation also just, man, I hope that you as a listener had as much fun and just as much inspiration from this than I did. And so I would just say, just answer a quick question in the comments. Who are you? You know, just like real
Who are you?
easy, nothing too deep. That would be great, because then, yeah, it just would help us, you know, just really know who our listeners are. Just makes it easier, you know.
Yeah. You don't have to get deep and metaphysical and talk about the whole origin of life. Just tell us where you're from and what you like to do.
Yeah, and your
Or
name.
you can get metaphysical too in your name. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
Whatever you guys
that's
want.
yeah, whoever you
Yeah.
are, you know, just
Yeah.
glad you're listening. Hope you're doing well, and we'll catch you in the next one. Much love to you.
Much love, guys.
Man, that was great.
That was fucking beautiful.